there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast. Today, we bring you the final episode recorded live as part of our Diversity Through Interaction Forum at the JALT 2018 conference. In this episode, two of our interviewees, Judith B. O'Loughlin and Dat Bao, sat down to discuss the connections they had identified between their areas of research during their individual interviews. Unfortunately, the third participant, Mehrasa Alizadeh, had to leave the forum early, but was kind enough to record her thoughts separately, which can be heard at the end of the discussion between Judith and Dat. To hear the interviews of each individual participant, please check the website www.TEFLology-podcast.com. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Okay, whenever you're ready. Ready?
We're ready.
Okay. I was really interested in what you talked about silence.
Yes, Judith.
And mainly because in working with teachers, I've talked about teachers about how the wait time that they need to give students to learn.
Exactly.
And they're often so afraid of the silence that the language is not going to develop in the silence. And I thought that when you said it was a multidimensional area and the kinds of talk, and I thought these were really important, the piece about inner talk and private talk when you whisper to yourself.
Exactly.
And with learners, I've always talked about the self-talk, about helping you organize your, what you're going to do in terms of writing and talking.
Self-talk.
And then the inside talk with the small person to one another. So I was really interested. I'm interested in silence because I think we talk so much and we don't give our learners time to reflect, and it's really an art because if you give them too much silence, then you've lost them.
Exactly.
And so I wanted you to comment on that.
Sure. I think silence is in many cases, as I got from Nata, tend to be good for the individual according to themselves. Like if I'm silent or if you are silent, we benefit from silence if we use silence as mental processing tool. But I think many of my participants say my silence is useful for myself. Other people cannot use my silence, so my silence in a way is useless to others, and it can be selfish. So when I ask them about their favorite way of learning, they say, "Yeah, I'm happy to be silent, but I don't want to work with silent people. They don't help me at all." So in a way, there may be a balance between the two. If you are silent too much, like you said, you already recognize that, then other people cannot learn from you. So even when people are silent, there should be a moment when they should start sharing to some extent. And then you also mentioned wait time, which is a big thing in the field, in our field, that we share. Recently, I realized that when teachers ask students a question and the teacher tries to wait, everyone is watching, and the watching create tension. So there are some of my colleagues who actually come up with the idea of watch time, but at the same time the teacher asks, and students will wait for each other to respond, but they will have the responsibility to respond to each other and not the teacher. And that model, I think, works better in solving the problem of being silent too long.
Yeah, and I think you've got a good point there in terms of wait time, the teacher wait time, and then the teacher modeling how to wait just enough time. And a lot of it depends on, I think, the questions that you ask students too. So an answer that would be very short in terms of, okay, well, where does the story take place? Well, the wait time on that is really short. Exactly. But if you want to reflect on the character, the wait time would be longer.
Definitely.
Right,
yes.
and I think that's a good point about not only the teacher directing wait time with the student, the teacher waiting for students to answer, and also I think giving them, I think I'm thinking of two things at the same time, giving them an opportunity when there's silence to either take notes or list things that they're thinking about before they respond. But then the other piece of that, which I thought was really good, is when you talked about wait time in the sense that they should interact with each other and not with the teacher.
Yes.
So I think that's really an art that's going to take time for teachers to learn and to practice.
Exactly, yes. And along that line, I think it may be a helpful idea to have students decide on their own wait time. Like this pair comprises very strong verbal students, so the wait time will be less extended than in other pairs. And what you say fits straight into that beautifully.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think you're right about silence. There's really something about, I think in terms of my own self, when I attend conferences and there's so much going on, that retreating to my hotel room for a few hours in the evening helps me. No TV, no radio, just sitting quietly and having a cup of tea or some water and just taking myself out of the fray of everything.
Yes.
And the intensity of the interaction. And I think we have to think about that with students as well.
Exactly, yes,
that,
the reflection.
In order to, to become a really proficient learner, they also need time to do nothing.
Exactly, I agree with you. I think learning is just a slice of the business. Before that, they need to incubate thoughts for learning, and after that, they need to continue to reflect on what they've learned.
Right.
So it's like a ongoing journey.
Right. Yeah, it's a journey, and they really haven't had the time to reflect when they're in school all day. And I wonder, when I was thinking about something about one of the things that I just recently found, which I used in my talk this morning about the de-stress area. And I'm wondering if in your classroom that you have moments where you can do a de-stress, where you stop everything and everyone can be silent for a while and de-stress.
That sounds great, yes.
You might start out with a community meeting which I called morning meeting, which is done very much in elementary school, but can be done with all learners, in which they share, what happened when you came to school today, or what would you like to talk about, or what do you have questions about before we do a piece on learning, and then creating a moment or two where they can de-stress and then moving on and learning more.
Yes.
So I think, unfortunately, we're often under the gun about how much time we have with students. And so it's going to become an art to build all that in.
Definitely, I agree with you. There should be space for learning and not just intensive interaction.
Yeah, because when they walk out, they're filled with all these different things, and it's easy to forget pieces of it because you've got so much going on in your
head. I agree with you, absolutely. Yeah. I also have a thought and also a bit of a question for you, because I reflect on what you said, which I love, is the idea of resilience. I haven't thought about it so much, but today when you talk about this model where you phrase it as I have, I am, and I can, and I suddenly think about the way teachers respond to that, how they build these three together in their experience. And I thought about myself as someone who has been working in Australia for the past decade. I realized one thing and people over there told me that this makes a difference between part of the American and Australian culture is in Australia they tend to tone down the idea of an individual can do a lot of things and make changes. They try to tone that down. It's just part of the culture. There's no right or wrong. They told me they really value the idea of network, partnership, mutual support. And when I listened to you today, I thought, if I bring this version back to my university, when asked to introduce, they might, I imagine, I use creativity to say, how do they practice this model? And then I thought they could say, we have, we are, and we can, instead of I am.
Yeah.
And I think, how do you feel about this?
I think Well, I think that works for, for the model of the student who has had support at home, who has had a kind of traditional entry into the second language learning, because he or she knows a lot about himself.
Right.
And then the we is something that you build at that time.
Yes.
But I think for the student who's been isolated and had an interruption, I think maybe you start with the I,
Yes.
and then you build to the we. And I really
Beautiful.
didn't think about that
Yes.
before. Yeah, so I think that's a good
Yes,
point.
yes. So we allow different groups or individual to make decision whether the first person can be single or plural according to what they want.
Yeah, and where they are in
Yes,
time. I think that's an important piece, is where they
Yes,
are.
yes,
Whether they have the strengths of the I
yes.
that they can now take into the we.
Definitely.
So,
Or the other way around. Maybe team up first, find way to learn from each other, and then when you're strong enough to stand on your own to some extent, you then kind of build your own personal confidence.
Right, I think that's a good point, that it should be fluid.
Yes.
In the sense that it would be, and for me, diversity and differentiation are really important with working with learners, so that you would differentiate based on the learner needs and the learner profile. And I think that's a really
I agree
important
with you.
piece.
Absolutely, Judith. That's
Thank
a
you.
beautiful idea.
Yeah.
I'm glad we connect very well,
Yeah.
don't you think? Yeah.
Could we, if possible, just for maybe the remaining 5 minutes,
Yes.
kind of direct your conversation to Mehrasa?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we
How
both
does
took
that
some
relate
notes,
to-
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Judith, would you like to go first with maybe a thought on what she said?
Yeah, I guess that as an older teacher and coming into technology first in like 1984 when I bought my first computer, and thinking how far it's come, one of the things that stuck out to me was the idea of bringing in other worlds and the reality, and maybe as part of a healing process for learners who have experienced trauma, and how they would move from, being able to recognize what they experienced in, let's say, a refugee camp, or what they experienced in their trek to coming to freedom, and being very careful about it. I think that the virtual reality in that would require not just a teacher, but may require another kind of professional, a family counselor, or the school psychologist, or somebody, or the social worker in the school, because I don't think that teachers would be totally equipped to do that alone. And I think the virtual reality would really help to really see their movement from where they've come to where they are. I can see the technology working that way.
I agree with Judith, absolutely. I didn't think about that so much, the aspect of, risk, where it takes
Yeah.
you and how far you go until you want to step back. Sometimes,
And I think, you have to be careful not to pretend to be something more than what you are in working with your students, because sometimes you can do more damage than you can
Yes.
do positive.
Yes,
So-
and I remember when I was a student in England, one of my professors said something that really opens my thinking related to technology. He said technology should do something that we wouldn't be able to do without it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the other piece of that, saying what you just said, would be the learning. So that if you have students that are, that you can't see every day.
Yes.
So technology brings education into their home. The big piece would be, would they have the resources? Would they have an iPad? Would they have internet access? And I think that's economically, that's a big piece, in whether schools can provide that for students, so that they can avail themselves of technology to
Exactly.
learn. So,
Agree with you.
so those were the two pieces I saw, was a virtually, what you could do with virtual
Yes.
reality,
Yes.
and the technology piece. So.
I agree with you absolutely.
I think the technology is moving much faster than the resources that are available to everyone. And having visited a lot of schools where and also training teachers, visiting a lot of schools where they have like a whole cart of iPads, and the teacher has to figure out what to do. And so they'll come up with something that's sort of not so connected to what they're teaching, and to get them to work on the iPad. So I think it really needs to really be integrated into their learning.
Exactly. And I would like to recapture part of what you said in the sense that I think technology should function alongside with pedagogy. Once you decided to use pedagogical tool, you must have an equivalent or relevant pedagogical tool to use with it, rather than adopting a modern, trendy, cool, exciting tool for the sake of
using a tool.
Being creative,
I've just been reading, there's an article from Kappa Delta Pi about using e-books in teaching young learners. And one of the things that they talk about, too, is the evaluating the resources within the ebook, and whether or not they're actually working, and whether they're working appropriately. And also one of the things they talk about is how much time online a learner should be working independent of interacting with others. So the young learner, because my field is the young learner, I think about that a lot in terms of I meet parents who don't want their kids on an iPhone or an iPad or a tablet because they want them to be interacting with others. Right. And then you meet other parents who are really hot on having an iPad all the time and watching something on the iPad. So I think you're right. It has to have a pedagogical piece to it, as well as the fun piece of using it.
Yes, definitely.
The article also talked a lot about that. If there are peripheral activities such as games that are connected to the story, they should be connected to the story. It shouldn't be a game just for a game. And so I think that's really important. I think that kind of dummies down a lot of what she was talking about, but it fits along the line of any kind of technology that you're using. Things need to be connected, and they need to have a pedagogical reason.
Exactly. Thank you, Judith, for resonating what we all think about.
Okay.
It's a big issue, but important.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you.
Yes, lovely talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I have to say that I really relate to most of the points that you mentioned regarding the use of technology in the classroom, in particular virtual reality. As I may have briefly pointed out in my part of the interview, I think it's very important for teachers to think meticulously about the ways they would like to integrate educational technology into their practice. I do agree with the point raised by Judith regarding the cautious use of virtual reality with students who have experienced some sort of trauma. In fact, it seems to me that a great way to effectively design technology-supported tasks for our classes would be for teachers like our group with diverse perspectives and range of experiences to team up together. I also think that another way to use technologies like VR for awareness and empathy raising would be to use it with students who've been lucky enough never to have seen the real world through the lens of a student affected by those traumas. Another thing to also bear in mind is that a lot of these technology tools, resources and stuff, especially augmented and virtual reality tools, are still in the development stage. But lots of these educational technology companies and corporations, I think, are making an attempt to consider pedagogy alongside technology. And that's why there's even talk about edutainment these days, to make sure that we're not missing on educating our students as we engage in entertaining them and trying to keep them engaged. I believe that as time goes by, we'll see more of these tools and apps develop, which are not only based on pedagogical findings and supported by current learning theories, but are actually also accessible to more learners and teachers, both in terms of hardware, like the type of devices that's needed to access the technology, and the software. Another point that I'd like to raise is regarding silence in the classroom. Many of us, particularly from non-Japanese backgrounds working in Japan, might frown upon silence from the students in the classroom and be constantly asking them to respond to our questions immediately. However, we should know that a lot of these moments of silence actually have different roots, functions, and meanings from what we think they are. I remember having attended a presentation at this year's JALT conference about it too. Actually, at that presentation, the speaker was reporting on a study that he had conducted with Japanese learners regarding their views and interpretations of silence in the classroom. And it turns out that in cultures like that of Japan, silence is not only impolite, but it's also respected and appreciated. So I believe that as non-Japanese teachers working in this context, it's important for us to be aware of this cultural difference and to respect it, and even to use it effectively as a way to provide students with opportunities to process the input and to reflect on their learning. Also, in the end, I'd like to thank the TEFLology team for this invaluable opportunity to participate in the interview forum. For me, it's been a great way to think beyond my field of interest and to consider various perspectives and different areas of research within ELT.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode, and thank you for the 3 participants for agreeing to take part in the forum and the panel discussion afterwards. If you'd like to contact us, please send an email to teflology@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. Check out our Facebook page, which is just the TEFLology Podcast on Facebook. And all of our previous episodes, including the interviews that informed this discussion, are available at www.teflology-podcast.com. Our book, Podcasting and Professional Development, A Guide for English Language Teachers, is also available at Amazon. So if you're interested in learning how to do this kind of thing yourself, then please check it out. Thank you very much for listening to the episode, and we'll see you again soon.